In 1987, a quiet retired Army veteran disappeared from his small home in Missouri. No signs of a break dash and dot, no goodbye note, just gone like he'd vanished into thin air. 4 long years later, something strange happened. During the cleanup of an old storage unit, investigators found something they never expected. His dog. Still alive. How did the dog get there? Who fed it? And most of all, what happened to the man? This story is real, raw, and disturbing. And it all begins on a cold October morning. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. October 21st, 1987, a Wednesday. The sun hadn't quite broken through the low-hanging fog when 67-year-old George Minter stepped outside his home in Lebanon, Missouri. He lived alone in a modest one-story house near the edge of town, a place people often forgot was there. No wife, no kids. Just George and his old German shepherd, Jack. He was known around town as Sarge. Not because anyone served with him, but because of how he carried himself, back straight, jaw set, words brief. Always polite, but always distant. That morning, George was seen walking Jack along their usual route, down Sycamore Lane, past the post office, and back through the side alley near Benny's Hardware. A few people nodded his way. He nodded back. By noon, he was gone. Cynthia Malone, a neighbor who lived 2 houses down, noticed something odd later that day. George's front porch light was still on, something he only did after dark. She thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it until the next day, when Jack's barking echoed nonstop. She walked over. The porch was still lit. Mail was piling up. No answer at the door. By the second day, she called the police. Deputy Rick Hannigan arrived on scene first. He'd spoken to George a few times before, mostly just polite hellos. The front door was locked, but a back window was slightly open. With a nod from Cynthia, Rick hoisted himself through it. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. Nothing looked out of place. No broken glass. No signs of a struggle. George's wallet was still on the kitchen table, along with his car keys. His truck was still in the driveway. Jack, the German shepherd, was pacing restlessly in the backyard. There was no food or water in his bowls. It was like George had stepped out for a minute and never came back. By the weekend, local volunteers were combing the surrounding woods. Flyers went up. George's army photo, neatly pressed uniform, steel blue stare, was stapled to telephone poles and taped to diner windows. But there were no leads, no witnesses. No sightings, nothing on security cameras. It didn't take long before the search fizzled out. The official report listed George Minter as missing, presumed deceased. But not everyone believed that. 4 months later, a reporter from the Lebanon Free Press named Emily Ray dug deeper. She visited George's old house, now empty and collecting dust. She found something that made her stomach turn. In the back shed, covered with a tarp, was a metal locker. Inside, a stack of letters from George's army days. Neatly folded, unopened envelopes. One was marked Return to Sender 1968. There was also a notebook. Nothing written in it except for one thing. They won't let it go. They're watching again. Emily turned that into police, but the note was dismissed as paranoid ramblings of an old soldier. Maybe PTSD, they said, maybe just stress. But Emily wasn't convinced. She wanted answers. She started asking around, visiting bars George had been known to frequent, poking her head into forgotten corners of town. That's when she met Charles Chuck Denton. Chuck was a retired trucker who used to hang around the old Waffle House near the highway. He remembered George. "Yeah, Sarge," Chuck said, stirring his coffee. He was spooked those last few weeks. Spooked how Chuck leaned in. He thought someone was watching his house. Said every night he heard something outside. Not just animals, footsteps, breathing. You know how that sounds when someone's right outside your window and they don't knock. Just stand there? Emily scribbled furiously in her notebook. Chuck shrugged. Told him it was in his head. Next thing I know, he's gone. One thing stood out. George hadn't touched his savings account since the day he vanished. Not a dollar. Yet his utilities had been paid for another 3 weeks after that day. It wasn't until the spring of 1988, months later, that the water and electricity were cut. Someone had been paying his bills. But who and why stop? 1 year passed, then 2, then 3. The town moved on. The house was eventually sold. The yard, once kept neat by George's strict military discipline, turned into a tangle of weeds and broken fencing. Jack, his loyal dog, had vanished too. Everyone assumed he ran off or died of starvation. But then came the 4th year, and with it a discovery no one saw coming. It was June 1991. A routine auction was being held for unpaid storage units at Locksafe number 42, a facility on the far side of town. Most people came for the thrill. Maybe there'd be antiques or someone's forgotten valuables. Bidders joked, laughed, and casually lifted rusted doors. Until Unit 76, it smelled bad. The manager, Bill Hendricks, peeled the door open with a crowbar after the lock was cut. A thin beam of sunlight hit the dust-filled unit. Everyone held their breath. In the corner, behind a mound of old clothes and rusted chairs, was a crate. Something moved inside it. They thought it was a rat. But it wasn't. It was a dog, and not just any dog. A German Shepherd, collar still intact. And on the tag, Jack, property of George Minter. The crowd backed away almost instantly. Even before anyone saw what was inside the crate, the stench hit them hard. The air smelled like rotten waste, like something had been trapped for years and given up on hope. Bill Hendricks, the storage manager, covered his nose with his sleeve. "Jesus," he muttered. "What the hell is that?" The thing inside the crate was moving slowly, unsteadily. A scratching sound followed by a soft whimper. Then a low, shaky growl. One of the bidders, a tall man in a denim vest, stepped forward cautiously. "That a dog?" Bill looked again. "Get a flashlight." Someone handed him a small one, and he pointed it inside the crate. There, curled up on a filthy blanket, was a German Shepherd. His fur was matted, stained with grime. His ribs showed through his skin. But he was alive. Barely, and on his collar was the name Jack. The police were called immediately. The unit was sealed, and everyone was told to leave the premises. Officer Marla Jensen, first to arrive, was stunned by the condition of the animal. "How the hell did this dog survive in here?" she said under her breath, watching animal control gently lift Jack out of the crate. He didn't bark. He didn't resist. He simply let them carry him, eyes half closed, too weak to fight. A vet was called in on the spot. Jack was dehydrated, underweight, and covered in pressure sores. The vet estimated he hadn't eaten properly in weeks, maybe longer. But here's what didn't make sense. He'd been groomed. Not recently, but within the past 6 months, his fur had been cut. His nails had been trimmed, and someone had fed him. At least for a while. Jack hadn't been locked in that storage unit for 4 years. He'd been moved there, recently. Officer Jensen pulled Bill aside. "Who rented this unit?" Bill walked her to the office, shuffled through a stack of payment records, and pointed to a name on the screen. "Unit 76, he said, rented by a guy named Ronald Burke. Paid cash every month, never missed a payment. Address? No physical, just a P.O. box." "What about ID?" Bill shook his head. "Only saw him twice. Thin guy, wore a ball cap. Maybe 50s, real quiet, in and out." Marla copied the information and called it in. "Run this P.O. box. I want anything you can get, surveillance, mail history, the works." Then she looked back toward the storage yard. Why would someone go through the trouble of hiding a dog? News spread fast. By the next morning, the Lebanon Free Press had a front-page story. "Dog found alive in storage unit linked to missing veteran." Emily Ray read it 3 times before grabbing her keys. She hadn't stopped thinking about George Minter since he vanished. Finding Jack alive after all these years changed everything. She drove straight to the vet clinic where Jack had been taken. The place smelled like antiseptic and wet fur. The waiting room was quiet. She showed her press badge and asked to speak with the attending veterinarian. "Dr. Lewis," a woman said, extending her hand. "You're here about the shepherd?" Emily nodded. "Jack," Dr. Lewis sighed. "He's lucky to be alive. I don't know who took care of him before he was locked up, but somebody did. You can't fake grooming like that. And get this, his microchip still works. Registered to George Minter." Emily's heart skipped. "So it's definitely him." "Oh, there's no doubt." "Can I see him?" Dr. Lewis hesitated. "He's resting, but sure, just for a minute." Jack was lying on a soft pad in a kennel, wrapped in a thin blue blanket. His eyes opened when Emily walked in. He didn't bark, just stared at her quietly like he was waiting for someone else. She knelt beside the glass. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. Jack lifted his head for a second, then laid it back down. Emily took a breath. "What did you see, huh? What do you remember?" Meanwhile, police were digging deep. They found surveillance footage from the storage facility. One of the exterior cameras, though old and grainy, showed a man unlocking Unit 76 3 weeks before the auction. He arrived in a gray Dodge van, stayed no more than 10 minutes, and left without looking back. The man wore a hoodie and a baseball cap head down the entire time. But there was something off. His movements were stiff, mechanical. Almost too careful. They ran the plates. Stolen. The van had been reported missing out of Kansas City 6 months earlier. That was when things got serious. A full investigation was launched. The unit was reopened, this time with forensic teams. They photographed every inch of it, each box, chair, and plastic container. Underneath a tarp, they found something else. A framed photo of George Minter. Folded behind it, tucked inside the frame, was a handwritten note. No name, no date, just a message. "You should have kept quiet." Now they know. It was signed with the letter R. Emily was called in to review the note. The police believed she was the only one who had ever seen George's personal writings. She compared the handwriting to the notebook she found years earlier. "Not George's," she said. "This one's sloppier. Rushed, like someone was scared." The police started building a list of people who'd known George. Former Army contacts, old friends, anyone who might have had a reason to threaten him. That's when another name popped up. Ronald Burke, retired military logistics officer. Dishonorably discharged in 1979 for falsifying supply reports. Last known residence? Missouri? The same name who rented the storage unit. They had their first real suspect. 2 days later, Jack began responding to voices again. When Officer Jensen visited him at the clinic, he perked up slightly when she called his name. But it wasn't until she said George that he whined, wagged his tail faintly, and tried to stand. It was the first movement he'd made on his own. That night, Jensen sat in her patrol car and reviewed everything. "Someone took care of Jack," she muttered, then locked him away, after George disappeared. She couldn't shake the feeling. This wasn't just a case of a missing man. Something had been covered up. And now, piece by piece, it was starting to come undone. Officer Marla Jensen couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the footage from the storage facility over and over in her mind. The way the man moved. How quick he was. How careful he had been to avoid the cameras, even though he probably didn't know they existed. That level of caution wasn't normal. He wasn't just hiding something. He was hiding himself. The next morning, she called a meeting at the department. 3 detectives, 1 state trooper, and the lead from the forensics unit sat at the long wooden table, sipping stale coffee and going over what they had. "Let's go over Burke," she said. Detective Alan Hughes stood up, clicked a remote, and brought up a blurry old photo on the projector. "This is Ronald Burke, retired logistics officer. Kicked out of the Army in '79. Charges never stuck, but there were whispers. Supply fraud, mismanagement of classified materials, possible connections to some illegal dealings overseas." "Forced out," another detective said. "But not jailed." "Nope," Hughes replied. "He kept a low profile after that. Changed jobs a lot. Maintenance worker, night janitor, truck driver. Always just enough to stay off the radar." "And now," Jensen added, "he's back in the picture. Renting a unit under his name and locking George Minter's dog inside it." She paused. "What are the chances this is random?" No one answered. That afternoon, they visited the P.O. box listed under Burke's rental information. A small rundown postal center sat between a pawn shop and a diner. The guy behind the counter, Frank, a talkative man in his 60s, recognized the name. "Ron? Yeah, comes in every so often. Real quiet, doesn't smile much." "When's the last time you saw him?" Jensen asked. Frank scratched his chin. "Maybe 2 months ago? Never picked up much. A few small packages. Always in the afternoon." "Did you see where he went?" "Gray van," Frank replied, "parked across the street." "Any chance you've got camera footage from that day?" Frank hesitated, then pointed to a dusty security camera near the ceiling. "Tape system. Don't overwrite unless I switch it. I can check." 30 minutes later, They had grainy footage of a man entering the shop wearing a ball cap and gloves. The timestamp read April 5th, 1991. He didn't speak to anyone, just picked up a small box and left. As he crossed the street, his face turned slightly toward the camera. Enough to freeze the room. "Print that," Jensen said. Back at the department, Emily Ray was sitting in the lobby. She held a folder tight to her chest and stood up when she saw Marla approach. "You said to call if I found anything strange," she said. "I remember." "Well," Emily said, holding out the folder, "I think I found something." Inside were copies of old local newspaper clippings, ones from George's first few years back in Lebanon after retirement. One article caught Marla's eye. "Retired Army veteran speaks out on improper conduct within military supply chain." It was from 1985, 2 years before George vanished. "He was a whistleblower?" Marla asked. Emily nodded. "Tried to go through official channels. Wrote letters. Talked to a local reporter who used a fake name. Nobody paid attention." She leaned forward. "But the guy he accused was part of the same base where Burke served." That made the room go still. "George called out fraud," Marla said, piecing it together, "and the guy he exposed was—" "Ronald Burke," Emily whispered. The next move was simple: find Burke. But he'd gone underground. The address linked to his last known job as a warehouse cleaner was a fake. The phone number on his employment form was disconnected. The Dodge van? Abandoned, wiped clean, parked behind an empty laundromat 3 towns over. He'd vanished like smoke, but not completely. Detective Hughes noticed something odd about one of the packages Burke had received at the P.O. box. It was addressed from a company called Midwest Secure Logistics. They weren't in any public listings. But Hughes, a former military investigator himself, recognized the name from a defense subcontractor directory. He made a few calls. Turned out, Midwest Secure Logistics was a shell company. A fake business name registered out of Kansas, used on and off since the late 1970s, always around the time materials went missing from military warehouses. Burke wasn't just hiding. He was part of something bigger. Later that night, Jensen sat with the photo of George again. He looked strong, proud. The kind of man who didn't back down when something wasn't right. Maybe that's what got him in trouble. She opened George's old notebook again, the one Emily had found in the shed. The page with "They're watching again" kept pulling at her. There were faint impressions beneath the writing, like something had been written on the page above and left a mark. She shaded the paper with the side of a pencil. Words slowly appeared. "Jack knows." "Follow him." She froze, then picked up her phone. "Get someone from K9 down to the clinic. We're walking that dog." The next morning, Jack was released into police care. Still frail, but moving on his own. They fitted him with a harness and let him out in the field beside George's old home. "Let's see if he remembers anything," Marla said. Jack sniffed the air, stood still for a moment. Then, with slow but certain steps, he began walking. Not back toward the neighborhood, but toward the tree line. He stopped at a fence, then pushed through. Jensen followed closely behind, with Emily and a K9 officer in tow. Jack led them behind the old wood mill, abandoned for years. He stopped near a rusted drain pipe, whined, scratched at the ground. That's when they saw it. A piece of fabric, camo green, frayed at the edge, and a shallow depression in the dirt, like something had been buried. Then dug up. "Call forensics," Marla said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "We're reopening this case. And we're doing it right. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. June 18th, 1991, Lebanon, Missouri. The sun was barely up, and already the area behind the abandoned wood mill was swarming with activity. Crime scene tape flapped in the breeze as detectives, forensics techs, and uniformed officers formed a perimeter around the drain pipe where Jack had stopped the day before. The scent of damp earth filled the air. Everyone knew they were about to find something, just not what. Officer Jensen stood to the side, hands on her hips, eyes locked on the shallow pit. She didn't speak, didn't blink much either. She knew instinctively this wasn't just a random burial site. George Minner had been trying to tell someone something, and now his dog had led them straight to it. The forensic team began digging carefully, using hand shovels and soft brushes. They worked slowly, peeling away layers of compacted dirt. Within minutes, they hit something solid. Metal. An old army footlocker, rusted but intact. One technician wiped the lid and motioned for gloves. Inside were bundles of documents sealed in plastic, along with a few familiar items. A metal case containing George's service ribbons, a Polaroid photo of George with two men in uniform, and a cassette tape labeled simply, August 85 Burke Call. Everyone gathered around as the items were laid out on a tarp. Jensen's eyes narrowed at the tape. "We need to hear this," she said. Back at the station, they dusted off an old tape recorder and slid the cassette in. The recording hissed, then a voice crackled through. George's voice, calm, controlled, but you could hear the edge in his tone. "This is for my record, in case anything happens to me." Then another voice, male, slightly hoarse, angrier. "You should stop this, George. Let it go. You're not in uniform anymore." George answered, "That's exactly why I won't let it go. You diverted 2 shipments, Burke. I have the logs. You say anything to the wrong people, you'll regret it." Silence. Then George again, "I'm not scared of you." The tape ended with the click of a phone being hung up. That was it. Emily sat frozen in her chair. "He knew," she whispered. "He recorded the threat." Jensen nodded. "And he buried the evidence. Like he knew someone would come for him." With the locker's contents now in police hands, things started moving faster. The 2 other men in the Polaroid were identified using Army personnel records. One was still alive, Robert Keenan, former quartermaster sergeant. The other had died in 1989 of heart failure. Keenan lived 2 hours away in Springfield, Missouri. By 3 p.m., Jensen and Detective Hughes were on the road. They found Keenan in a quiet nursing home. His hands shook, and he squinted hard at the photo when they showed it to him. "Yeah, that's us," he said softly. "George on the left, me in the middle, and damn Burke on the right." He paused, then leaned back and sighed. "We were all in the same unit. 5th Battalion Logistics Division, Okinawa. Do you remember anything suspicious around 1985? Jensen asked. Keenan nodded slowly. "There was talk. Stuff going missing. Crates being signed out and never logged." George started sniffing around. "Did he confront Burke?" "Oh, yeah. George didn't play games. Said he'd turn it in. I told him to be careful." He looked away. "I should have said more." Back in Lebanon, the town was waking up to the news. "Veteran's dog leads police to secret locker," the headlines read. Locals were whispering again. People who had barely remembered George now spoke his name with fresh curiosity. Jack, meanwhile, was transferred to a recovery foster home under police watch. Emily visited him that evening, kneeling in the grass with a small cup of water. "You did good, boy," she whispered. Jack's ears perked at the sound of her voice. 2 days later, another break. One of the analysts looking through the recovered documents found something odd. A duplicate set of shipping records, typed on military paper, but with slightly different font sizes and margins. Forged. They matched George's handwriting. He had copied the originals, meaning the real records, the ones that exposed the fraud, were still missing. But if George had made duplicates, where were the originals? And did Burke know? That night, Jensen drove to George's old house again. The current owners had moved out after the story broke. They didn't want the attention. Jensen walked through the empty halls, flashlight in hand. She retraced George's steps. Kitchen, living room. The back shed where the first notebook had been found. She paused there. The shed was small, barely enough room for a lawnmower and tools. But something about the floor caught her eye. The planks near the corner looked newer than the rest. She knelt, pried up a board. There, wrapped in plastic and bound with electrical tape, was a thin wooden box. Inside, more records, all original. Every shipment, every transaction. All traced directly back to Burke and 2 other names. Names Jensen didn't recognize, yet. The next morning, she brought the evidence to the DA. They agreed. It was enough to open a federal case. And it was time to track down Ronald Burke for real. Emily received a call that afternoon. "You might want to be careful," Jensen warned her. "If Burke knows we're closing in, he'll go quiet." "I'll be fine," Emily said, but her voice wasn't as strong as usual. She was already looking over her shoulder. And she wasn't the only one. That night, a break-in occurred at the storage facility. Someone cut through the chain-link fence and tried to torch Unit 76. Fortunately, the fire didn't catch. It fizzled out thanks to recent rain. But the message was clear. Someone was cleaning up loose ends. And whoever it was, they knew the clock was ticking. The next morning, a smell lingered in the air at lock safe number 42, a mix of gasoline and charred wood. Officer Jensen stood in front of Unit 76, now blackened at the edges. A smudge of smoke had crept up the metal door, but the fire hadn't spread far. Rainfall from the night before had saved it from total destruction. Still, someone had tried. Security footage, she asked, staring at the melted plastic camera on the corner of the building. Gone, said Bill Hendricks, the facility manager. They knew where to hit. Cut the cables first, then started the fire. Someone's trying to erase something, Jensen muttered. But they were too late. The contents of Unit 76 had already been logged, photographed, and taken into custody. What Jensen didn't know yet was that the attempt wasn't just about erasing. It was about warning. And someone was watching. At the police station, Detective Hughes was running background checks on the two new names found in the records George had hidden, Martin Clay and Victor Russo. Both had military ties. Clay had been a procurement officer in the early 80s, suspended in 86 for violations of protocol. Ever charged. Opened a small import business in Kansas soon after. Russo was harder to pin. Last known role was in warehouse oversight at a base in Oklahoma. After that, nothing. No phone records, no employment, no taxes. Like he'd dropped off the map. They were more than friends, Hughes said. These men were tied into something organized. Maybe even beyond military supply fraud. Like what? Asked Jensen. Hughes hesitated. Arms movement, selling off surplus. Shipping materials that weren't supposed to leave the country. And George found out, Jensen said quietly. Exactly. Emily, meanwhile, was back at the newspaper office, now flooded with tip calls. Everyone wanted to be part of the story, neighbors, ex-soldiers, people claiming to have seen George or Jack over the years. Most of it was noise, but one call stood out. A man named Richard Groves claimed he saw George just weeks before he vanished. Emily invited him in. Groves was in his 70s, thin and worn, with deep lines etched into his forehead. He sat stiffly across from her, nervously twisting his cap in his hands. I saw him, he said, at that rest stop off Highway 44. When? Late September. Might have been the 28th. What was he doing? Meeting someone. I pulled in to grab coffee and saw George standing by his truck. He was arguing with a guy I didn't recognize. Things got heated. What did the other man look like? Groves shook his head, tall, balding. Wearing a tan jacket, he looked angry. Kept poking George in the chest. Did you hear anything they said? Groves hesitated. Just one thing. As I walked by, I heard the other man say, You think this ends with you? You're wrong. Emily felt a chill run through her. Did you tell anyone this before? No one asked. Jensen and Hughes followed up immediately. They pulled logs from the highway rest stop's payphone booths. Yes, they still had those back then. A single number had been dialed twice the day George was last seen. It led to a disconnected landline in Wichita, Kansas. Tracing that number backward, they found something else. The number had once been registered to a shell company owned by Victor Russo. Everything was circling back, but the biggest shock came next. On a hunch, Hughes contacted an old Army buddy now working in federal logistics. He asked about past investigations tied to surplus theft during the 80s. The friend replied with a list. And at the bottom under sealed case files was a single line, classified, alleged fraud ring Minder Clay Russo subject deceased, 1987. Subject deceased. They had written George off before any investigation began. That night, Jensen met Emily outside the foster home where Jack was recovering. The dog's coat was cleaner now, his ribs no longer showing. He looked better, but there was still something tired in his eyes. He's seen too much, Emily said softly, petting his head. So have we, Jensen replied, then paused. We found something today. She explained the sealed federal document. The classified file that quietly erased George before anyone ever looked. They wanted it forgotten, Jensen said. All of it. But someone didn't forget, Emily added, staring at Jack. The pressure was building. Jensen pushed for federal involvement, and finally it came. 2 U.S. Marshals arrived in Lebanon 3 days later. Stern, all business. They brought backup, boxes of files, and a single photograph they wouldn't let out of their hands. A surveillance still from Kansas taken just 6 weeks ago. It was Ronald Burke, wearing a tan jacket, standing outside a motel with Martin Clay. They're alive, one marshal confirmed, and still working together. Where were they headed? Jensen asked. We don't know. They split up after this was taken. But at least we know they're on the move again, Hughes said. The marshal nodded. And if they think George's evidence survived, they'll come back to clean house, Jensen finished. The next night, Emily got a call at 2:13 a.m. She almost didn't answer, but something told her to pick up. On the other end, a voice whispered, "You're digging too deep. Stop." Then the line went dead. Her hands shook. She called Jensen immediately. I just got a threat. Someone knows I've been asking questions. Where are you right now? Jensen asked. At home. Don't move. Within 10 minutes, 2 squad cars were parked outside Emily's apartment. Officers stayed with her until sunrise. It was no longer just a cold case. It was war. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The sun rose slowly over Lebanon the next morning, but no one in the department had slept. Emily stayed under police protection, guarded by 2 officers who rotated shifts. The newsroom she worked in was now under lockdown. Her editor refused to let anyone come or go without ID and police clearance. The phone call had changed everything. Now they knew, Burke, Clay, or Russo, someone was watching. Meanwhile, Officer Jensen was on the move. She and Detective Hughes drove to a quiet spot just outside city limits, an old farmhouse George had visited often back in the day. It belonged to his uncle, now long deceased. According to George's records, he'd made several trips there in the months before he vanished. Emily had found a scribbled note in one of George's journals that simply said, "If they come, the barn knows where to speak." Cryptic, but Jensen trusted George by now. He was methodical, careful. When they reached the farm, everything looked abandoned. The mailbox was stuffed with yellowed flyers. The grass had grown tall, swaying in the breeze. A rusted gate leaned off its hinges. Looks like no one's been here in years, Hughes said, stepping through the weeds. They checked the house, empty, then made their way to the barn. Inside was darkness. Dust floated in the sunlight, cutting through broken slats in the roof. A few rusted tools hung on the walls. Old tires stacked in the corner. Then, near the far side, Jensen noticed something off. A floorboard was missing a nail. She knelt and pulled it up. Underneath was a weatherproof box. Inside, wrapped in an oilcloth, were several envelopes marked, "Do not open unless I'm gone." Each envelope was labeled. One was addressed to the Department of Justice, another to a reporter at the St. Louis Tribune. And the last one, handwritten and sealed with tape, was marked Emily Ray. Jensen stared at the envelopes, then looked at Hughes. He knew they'd try to shut him up, she said. They drove back to town immediately. In the department's evidence room, they opened the envelopes under tight supervision. Inside were typed letters, maps, and 2 photo slides. George had gathered everything, dates, names, documents, even license plates. He listed every shipment that was altered under Burke's watch. He included warehouse scans and receipts. Even referenced arms that were sent overseas, ending up in conflict zones they were never supposed to reach. It was more than a cover-up. It was a crime ring, with ties to people still working in defense contracts, people who might still be moving stolen weapons. The letter to Emily was personal. He apologized for disappearing, said he was afraid but couldn't ignore what he knew, said Jack had been his only comfort through it all. "If anything happens to me," the letter read, "just know I never stopped trying. I hope Jack finds someone good to lead him home." She read it twice, then quietly wiped a tear and placed it in her bag. She wasn't done. Not yet. Across town, another call came in. A retired Army mechanic named Joel Ramirez, one of George's old unit contacts, said he'd heard about the case and wanted to talk. George was right, he told them over the phone. We all knew Burke was dirty, but no one thought he'd take it this far. Joel lived in Branson, about 90 minutes away. Jensen and Hughes hit the road again. But halfway there, a call came in from dispatch. Be advised, Ramirez's house is on fire. Emergency crews are on the scene. Possible arson. Jensen slammed the brakes. What? Hughes barked. That can't be coincidence. They turned around, sirens blazing. But by the time they arrived, it was over. Joel Ramirez's home was burned to the ground. His body was found inside near the phone. He hadn't made it out. The case shifted overnight. Now it wasn't just a missing person investigation. It was a murder case, and the warning to Emily made sense. Burke, or whoever he worked with, was tying up loose ends. Fast. The federal agents moved in harder. They started knocking on old contacts from Burke and Clay's days in the service. They found 3 more retired officers willing to talk, only under protection. Each of them confirmed that George had uncovered something huge back in 1985. He had the shipment numbers, the routes, even the payoffs, one of the officers said. He was building a file. Last I saw him, another added, he told me he was going to leak it to a reporter. But then he disappeared. Meanwhile, Jack was starting to recover. His fur was shinier now. He ate without hesitation. And he followed Emily like a shadow any time she came to visit. He hasn't barked once, she said to Jensen. Not since he was found. He's waiting, Jensen said. Just like you. Late one evening, Hughes got a tip. A gray van like the one Burke had used was spotted 2 towns over, parked behind an old truck stop. No plates. Matches partial description from weeks ago. They rolled in within the hour. The van was empty, clean. But a receipt was found in the glove box, dated just 2 days ago, from a motel near Kansas City, paid in cash. Under the name Clay Martin, an alias, reversed. But they were getting sloppy. And that meant they were getting nervous. Jensen put the entire department on alert. I don't care what time it is, track this guy. Now. She faxed the receipt to the marshals. They matched it to a man who'd checked into room 112 at the Red Acres Motel, but left before sunrise. Only thing he left behind. A crushed cigarette and a matchbook from a gun show in Tulsa. The same one happening this weekend. They're making a deal, Hughes said, trying to unload the last of the stolen gear. Then we'll be there waiting, Jensen replied. She looked over at a photo of George on the board. We're not letting them vanish like you did. July 1st, 1991, 2 weeks since the fire at Joel Ramirez's house. 2 weeks since George Minder's old dog had led investigators to the box that blew the case wide open. Officer Marla Jensen sat in the back seat of an unmarked car across from the Tulsa Fairgrounds. She wasn't blinking much. Neither were the 2 federal marshals beside her. Through a pair of binoculars, she scanned the entrance of the gun show that stretched across 3 halls. Thousands of visitors were inside, shoppers, dealers, tourists. And maybe somewhere in that crowd, the men they'd been chasing since 1987. Clay and Burke know they're in trouble, said Marshal Trent. They'll be here to meet a buyer. But they'll be in and out fast, Jensen nodded. Her eyes narrowed at a gray pickup that pulled into the rear lot. Check that guy, she said. A man in a ball cap stepped out, pulled a duffel bag from the bed, and walked inside. A second man followed him in a tan windbreaker. Burke or Clay, they couldn't be sure, not yet. Inside, the gun show was loud, crowded, and restless. Rows of booths stretched from wall to wall, showcasing everything from antique revolvers to military-grade scopes. Federal agents walked casually through the aisles, blending in with the crowd. One of them spotted a man leaning against a back booth, mid-50s, heavy-set, bald on top, sunglasses indoors. He whispered into his shoulder mic, "Suspect in sight." Tan jacket, no contact yet. Back at the department in Lebanon, Emily Ray sat at her desk, going over George's envelope again. She had read his letter 10 times. But this time she noticed something. A line on the back of the envelope, barely visible in pencil. Back wall. Shed, paint bucket. She grabbed her bag and drove straight to George's house. The backyard shed was still taped off, but with permission from Jensen, she went in. Behind the stacked shelves and empty cans, under a white paint bucket, was another notebook, water-damaged but still readable. It wasn't more evidence, it was George's daily entries. Dates, names, feelings. They followed me again today. I think Ruzzo's watching the house. Told Jack to run if they come. Then one line stopped her. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone." Emily felt her throat tighten. She pressed the book to her chest and walked out into the sunlight. George never ran, but maybe now someone would run for him. Meanwhile, at the Tulsa Fairgrounds, tensions were rising. The man in the tan jacket stepped into a small hallway near the vendor loading bay. The heavy-set man with the duffel followed behind. Jensen and the marshals were already in place. They moved in fast, blocking both exits. "Hands up," one agent shouted. The man in the jacket hesitated. That 1 second was enough to confirm it, Ronald Burke. They tackled him to the ground, wrestled the bag away, and found exactly what they feared. Inside, 3 rifles, 2 military-grade scopes, 1 thick envelope full of unmarked cash. Clay wasn't with him, which meant he was still out there. Jensen was back in Lebanon by nightfall. Burke refused to speak. He sat silently in a holding room, eyes cold and empty, arms folded across his chest. Not a word. Not even when they played the tape of his phone call with George. "He's waiting for something," Jensen said. Hughes added, "or someone." They returned to the files George had hidden. In one document, a shipment list had a scribbled note next to it. "Follow the shipment from Unit 84. That's the one they can't explain. They looked it up. Unit 84 was a military storage pod transferred out of Missouri in late 1986, 6 months before George vanished. Destination, unknown. But a follow-up entry placed it in an old government facility just outside Wichita. Abandoned for years, but still leased. Under a shell company registered to Victor Russo. "Let's go," Jensen said. "We're not waiting anymore." They arrived just after midnight. A fenced facility, rusted gate hanging open. No lights, no guards. Just a large, silent building with 1 truck parked beside it. They entered quietly, flashlights sweeping over walls covered in dust. Then Jensen saw it, a door marked 84. She approached slowly, gun drawn. The door creaked as she opened it. Inside were crates, some empty, some still sealed. And at the back of the room, a makeshift office, a desk, a chair, a radio. And someone sleeping on a cot. She moved closer, heart pounding. It wasn't Russo. It was a woman. She jolted awake, confused and terrified. "Who are you?" Jensen asked. The woman stared at her. "I don't know. They told me to stay, said I'd be safe here." "Who told you?" She hesitated, and whispered, "Clay. He said it would all be over soon." They searched the place all night. In one of the locked crates, they found more weapons, some labeled in foreign languages. This wasn't just stolen gear, it was international. Jensen knew the feds would handle that part. But she wasn't done chasing the names. Especially one, Russo. Back at the station, Emily called. "I think I found something in George's notebook." She read a passage aloud. "If Russo disappears, check the green book in the cabinet." Jensen returned to George's house again, this time with permission to open the locked kitchen cabinet. Inside was a green ledger, simple, unmarked. Inside that, dates, flights, names, and one address circled 3 times. A small storage unit facility near St. Louis. The one George had tried to visit a week before he vanished. A unit under the name RZ Transport Number 19. Jensen stared at the address. And then she understood. This was where it had all started. And maybe it was where it had all ended. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The address was clear. Eastview Storage, Unit 19, just outside St. Louis. Officer Marla Jensen sat in her cruiser that morning, staring at the printed form Emily had found. The ledger from George's house listed the same storage unit 3 times. It wasn't a mistake. He had been there. Maybe more than once. And now, 4 years later, she was going there too. By 9 a.m., Jensen, Hughes, and 2 federal agents were parked outside the gates of Eastview Storage. The manager, an older man in a red cap named Perry, came out holding a clipboard. "You said Unit 19, he asked. "That's right," said Jensen. "We have a search warrant." Perry scratched his neck. "Well, you're not the first ones to ask about it." Jensen froze. "What do you mean?" "Guy came by about a week ago, said he was the owner. Had a key, but he didn't open it, just stood there for a while, then left." "Did you get a name?" "Nope, didn't sign in either." Looked nervous, though. Kept his hood up. "You got cameras?" "Just one at the front gate." They checked the footage. Sure enough, a man in a hoodie entered on foot, never looked up at the camera, stayed exactly 13 minutes, and left. No vehicle.o license plate, but his build slim, quick, and the walk. It matched what they had on file for Victor Ruzo. He had been here, probably for the last time. The group made their way to Unit 19. It was just like the others, beige steel, padlocked shut. Except the dirt in front of the door had footprints. Fresh. Cut it, Jensen said. A bolt cutter snapped the lock clean off. Jensen reached for the door and paused. Everyone ready? They nodded. She lifted the door. The sunlight hit first. Dust particles danced in the beam as the door clattered up. The inside was quiet, still. A thin layer of dust coated everything, but nothing looked damaged. Inside were boxes, dozens of them, labeled by hand. Some were sealed. Others had already been opened. 2 crates near the back were covered with a tarp. Jensen moved forward cautiously. Hughes kept watch at the door. One by one, the boxes were opened. Paper files, scanned documents, shipment records from the mid-1980s, fake IDs, passports, military access cards. It was a gold mine of everything George had been chasing. The proof. Names, payments, transactions, smuggling routes. But what stopped Jensen cold was a manila folder marked Minter. Inside, a full background check, photos of George walking his dog, a hand-drawn map of his home, a printed note. Remove immediately before leaks spread. They had targeted him, followed him, tracked him, waited for the moment to make him disappear. Her fingers trembled as she flipped to the last page. Report, brief, cold. Target did not comply. Handled as planned. Dog escaped. Behind her, Hughes was pulling the tarp off the crates near the back. Inside were military radios, vintage gear worth thousands. Illegal to sell, more stolen merchandise. But in the corner, almost missed, was a plastic dog bowl, scratched and dirty. And beside it, a leash, torn, old. It had George's name tag on it. Jensen turned to Hughes. He looked pale. They brought the dog here, he said. They kept it, she whispered. They kept Jack. Emily was called immediately. She drove down that afternoon, clutching George's notebook the entire ride. When she stepped inside the unit, she saw everything. Boxes, the leash, the photos. Her eyes locked on the folder labeled Minter. She didn't speak, just stared. Then finally said, "This is where it happened, isn't it?" Jensen didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was all around them. They found more in the back, beneath a pile of moving blankets. A duffel bag half-zipped. Inside, a blood-stained shirt, a military ID badge, bent and faded, George's, and a keychain that matched the set Emily remembered from George's truck. All of it had been left here, hidden, for years. But none of them could figure out one thing. Why leave the dog? Why not get rid of everything? Unless Ruzo had planned to return. Maybe even expected no one to ever come looking. But Jack had lived. And now everything was coming out. That night the unit was sealed. Agents guarded the entrance around the clock. And Jensen made one final call to the federal task force overseeing the case. She told them, "We have enough now. Every part of the fraud, documents, weapons, witnesses. Burke's in custody. Clay is still out there. But we've got Ruzo by the tail." "Do you think he'll come back?" they asked. Jensen stared at the empty dog bowl one more time. "I don't think he ever left for good." The next morning, a neighbor near George's old house called the tip line. She said she'd seen someone around the property last night around 3 a.m. tall, slender, walking slow. He stopped by the back fence, she said, then just stood there, like he was looking for something. Did he take anything? No, just stood, then walked off. What direction? Toward the old train tracks. Jensen and Hughes drove out immediately. The tracks ran behind the woods, parallel to a drainage ditch. A known shortcut out of town, quiet and mostly forgotten. They followed the trail for half a mile. Then Hughes saw it, a pile of torn clothing, burned papers, and a matchbook from a hotel near Kansas City, same one they had traced weeks ago. Fresh footprints led away from the mess. The trail was still warm. As they headed back to the car, Jensen's pager buzzed. It was dispatch, a break. Unit 19? "You need to get back here," the voice said. "Why?" Jensen asked. "We opened the false wall." She froze. "What false wall?" There was silence for a moment. Then the officer replied, "There's a hidden section in the back. We pulled it open." Jensen held her breath. And what's behind it? The voice was shaky. You're not going to believe this. The drive back to Eastview Storage was the longest 20 minutes of Officer Marla Jensen's life. The last words from dispatch played over and over in her head. You're not going to believe this. She had no idea what they meant, but something inside her already knew. This would be the moment the case either cracked wide open or shattered everything they thought they understood. The officers were already waiting outside Unit 19 when Jensen and Hughes arrived. One pointed toward the back of the storage unit, face pale. We moved a few boxes and noticed a section of wall looked off. Lighter paint, different screws, the officer said. When we pulled it back, there was another space, sealed off from the rest. Jensen nodded. Show me. Behind the crates and documents, the wall had clearly been tampered with. The seams were rough, not professional. Someone had added a false panel, painted to match the others. A few screws, and the wall swung open with a creak. What lay beyond wasn't big, maybe 10 feet across, 8 feet deep. But the air hit hard, stale, dusty, with a faint smell of rust and something else. Something. Bitter. They stepped inside slowly. Flashlights clicked on. At first, it looked empty. Then Jensen spotted the cot. It was old, worn, covered with a thin blanket and what looked like military-issued sheets. Next to it was a water bowl and a dog bed. Dirty, torn, still pressed into the floor like it had been used recently. On the far wall, Jensen noticed deep claw marks. Not scratches, gouges, like something or someone had tried to dig out. She whispered. He kept the dog here. Further in, they found a table cluttered with open cans of food, a few tools, a flashlight with a dead battery, and a folded tarp. Then Hughes saw it, a worn photo taped to the wall. It was George, standing outside his house, one hand resting on Jack's head. But the photo had been defaced, the face scribbled out with a thick black marker, repeatedly, and below it written in ink, "Shouldn't have talked." Jensen felt her stomach turn. This wasn't just a hideout. This was a prison. In the far corner was a steel storage bin, locked. They pried it open. Inside were George's clothes, his boots, dog tags, wallet, and beneath them, bones, small. Canine. Jensen stared at the collar, still looped around one of the remains. It said Jack. She froze, all this time. The dog they found in the other unit wasn't Jack. It had been another dog, same breed, same look, maybe used to confuse anyone who came too close. The real Jack never made it out. They buried the truth, and almost got away with it. Suddenly, Hughes' radio crackled. Possible suspect spotted near Highway 61. Black truck matching Ruzo's last known vehicle. Headed south. Jensen didn't hesitate. Let's move. They caught up with the truck near a rest stop just outside Jefferson County. It was parked on the side of the road, engine still warm. No one inside, but footprints led into the woods nearby. They followed, guns drawn. Branches snapped underfoot as they moved quickly through the trees. After 10 minutes, they found him. Victor Ruzo, slumped against a tree, breathing hard, mud on his jeans. He didn't run. He just looked up and said, "Took you long enough." Jensen stepped forward. "Where's George?" Ruzo smiled. "You already know." "Where is he?" she shouted. Ruzo didn't speak. Hughes cuffed him and pulled him to his feet. "You buried him, didn't you?" Hughes asked. "Back at Unit 19, Ruzo just smirked. But the silence said it all. 2 days later, forensic teams searched the ground beneath the dog bed. After removing layers of cracked concrete, they reached a shallow space lined with plastic. There, beneath the floor of the hidden room, they found a second body, wrapped in an old tarp, still wearing dog tags, still wearing George's jacket. Inside the jacket pocket was a crumpled piece of paper, written in shaky handwriting. "I tried. Tell them. Don't forget me." The headlines hit hard. Retired veteran vanished in 1987, found 4 years later in hidden storage room. Dog's discovery led investigators to secret room human remains. Federal weapons scandal connected to missing veteran confirmed. Ruzo was charged with murder, weapons trafficking, conspiracy, and obstruction. Clay was arrested a week later in Arizona. Burke remained in custody. The ring was shut down. But George never got to see it. Emily attended George's reburial on a cloudy Tuesday. She placed a photo of Jack at the grave. "I think he stayed with you," she whispered. "Right until the end." Jensen walked up beside her. Not many cases haunt me, she said quietly. But this one will, Emily nodded. He didn't run, he stayed. He always meant to come home, Jensen said. And in a way, he finally did. If you like this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also, to strengthen our community, let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video.